the conversation with the auditor goes something like, hey, here's this change, and it was changed in this version of the software according to the developers. Can you show me when that went to UAT? One of the benefits that we find with BuildMaster is there's one screen. If we say this release and we go and look, we know exactly when it went to UAT. So I bring up that page. This is when it went to UAT. So now we've been using BuildMaster for quite a while. The primary thing that we wanted to ensure was that the artifacts that were getting deployed in each environment were identical. So we needed some sort of artifact store that locked away the artifacts separate from what the devs were doing, separate from their source control, that made it so that we were ensuring that what went to dev was the same as what went to UAT for prod, and was the same version number and was the exact same binaries and other files. We also needed the gates to be very strict and the ability to have approvals and the checks and the other stuff that we wanted to do had to be an integral part of what we're dealing with. We also needed quite the security standpoint. We wanted to have this separation between the people who were authoring the pipelines and the people who were saying, go ahead and do that deploy. So in our environment, the ops team authors the pipelines and then gives it back to the dev team to operate on an ongoing basis. So we aren't involved in the day-to-day of doing deployments anymore. We're only involved in creation of the automations that allow those things to happen. And that segregation of duties had to be intrinsically supported by the tools that we were looking at. Through the trial process and then also through using it, we just found BuildMaster hit all the notes for us. So as well, I mean, the kind of support for the Microsoft tool set. We're 100% a Microsoft shop, so that was also important in our decision factors. There's a lot, there's tools out there, but there's definitely tools that are more focused on Linux and that stack of technologies. We wanted one that was Microsoft technologies first. One of the things that we're constantly doing or constantly is on our mind is really managing risk, and that's where the compliance stuff and some of the stuff we do comes from. So we are like we said, the owners or whatever of the UAT and prod environments in the development life cycle, because we want to guarantee that the UAT that the business is using is identical to the prod, so that when they approve a change, when they say, yeah, go ahead, they're the same. But also, because of that, we end up doing a bunch of compliance checks and standards checks before people go into UAT to make sure that the rules that have been established by our security office and by our auditors and that sort of stuff are all being met. I mean, in general, we don't want the developers to have any sort of write access or any sort of things going into production. So that's part of it, right? That's part of the separation of duties that we have. But in addition, there's limitations and standards that we put on individual artifacts to make sure that the stuff that we're getting in UAT is deployable. Technical bits like the debug settings within web configs. We also watch for cross-environment communication. So in the past, there's been big problems caused by a production system connecting to non-production data. And so we ensure that those communication channels are production to production, not crossing streams. We have a yearly audit, and the audit is around our kind of beginning to end change process. So the conversation with the auditor goes something like, hey, here's this change, and it was changed in this version of the software according to the developers. Can you show me when that went to UAT? One of the benefits that we find with BuildMaster is there's one screen. If we say this release and we go and look, we know exactly when it went to UAT. So I bring up that page. This is when it went to UAT. Then the auditor goes, cool, who approved it from the business to say it went to prod? Same screen. Here's who approved it. Okay, can you show me when it went to prod? Here it is. So one of the reasons we got a lot of buy-in from the auditors is we weren't jumping around between 2 or 3 different places. We weren't going from Excel spreadsheets to this or that. They initially engaged the development team, pick a work item, and then we track it through. As soon as it gets into BuildMaster, we can track that all the way through to prod and tell them all the gates that they want to know about. In addition, from the compliance side, we have a compliance scanner we call DaveBot, and it takes a look at some of the other stuff from a security standpoint that the auditors want to see around, you know, just risks that we've run into in the past. So some of this stuff is best practices, like I said, with web configs and debug equal true and whatever. But other things are, you know, that we're guaranteeing that a SQL script isn't adjusting rights. Rights follow a different process than deployments. So we make sure that there's nothing that's adjusting rights within a SQL script that could compromise the security of the database. And auditors love that. They're like, well, how are you sure that this is going on when there's not a person there looking at it? Well, we've automated that process, and so our scripts check it and make sure that things are working the way we want them to. With BuildMaster, I sit down with them with the screen. I sit down interactively, and so before, you know, there was like 2 or 3 different people working on it, and it was a day or 2 of gathering information. The auditor would go, here's the work item and the version we're worried about, and people would go and gather information on it and come back. We had an automated system that we track stuff with, but there was manual pieces to it, and we had to gather information from more than one spot. This way, there isn't any, like, we're not running queries on a database to get the information out. It just so happens that everything we need is just on the main BuildMaster screen. I mean, in general, my impression for somebody who's totally in the private sector, in a startup or whatever, you know, velocity, time to market, and maybe, you know, saving some money is foremost. That's what they're trying to do. In the environments that I work in, no one's going to necessarily, you know, give you a promotion for saving a bit of money but increasing risk. So as you said, like the first kind of weather vane is there any additional risk to what we're doing? Is this totally changing the way that we're doing stuff that could potentially be a risk? If you can answer, well, no, not really, and then you can also increase velocity or be maybe a little more efficient, then that's fine. And that's part of what, you know, us using BuildMaster and going with automation has done, is we've been able to sell to the auditors and the other people involved, this is reducing risk and increasing velocity. If we can do both those things, we get a lot of buy-in about what's going on. But if anything that we do starts with, well, you know, there's a little bit of risk here, we're not going to get the same kind of reception. We're not going to get the same approvals and the enthusiasm, because no one wants to increase the risk. So, you know, to some respects, and this isn't necessarily the definition everybody uses, but it comes down to how you think about DevOps, right? DevOps is DevOps, right? We're ops, they're dev. So what does this mean? In my mind, my selfish, from the ops side, view of this is that DevOps is operations, making sure that we don't become the barrier to an agile process. So the agile team is sitting there increasing their cadence and getting faster and faster in what they're doing, and they're releasing to dev every hour and whatever else. But if when they get to UAT, everything comes to a screeching stop and we have manual processes and we'll get to it in 3 days and whatever else, unacceptable. We've now kind of totally negated the benefits that people want to see from this agile process, from this ability to rapidly revision. So we're trying to use those same automation idea, be able to increase our cadence and do stuff rapidly while still following the rules and the other stuff that we need to do. So the best way to do that for us is automation. Like there's really no other way. We can't embed operators on every single agile team, but we can have them all use the exact same scripting, the exact same processes. And if they're doing that, auditors are happy, we're still getting done the things the way that we want it, and they're getting their main benefits, which is this increased agility and the faster releases. What we found in addition is that there's direct value back to the business. So although, to begin with, it looks like this is, a proposition to increase cadence and do stuff from a developer agile process standpoint, we found that because we can do the deployments faster in production, all of a sudden change windows start to shrink, outages in production start to shrink, and so the business doesn't expect to have this value directly related. They're just like, oh yeah, we'll get changes in quicker, that's cool. That's what we want. We want, when I give you a change request, I want to be able to see it in UAT in a week. I don't want to wait 6 months to see it. They understand that value proposition, but in addition, by automating and concentrating on the UAT and prod stuff, we're able to do it quicker and therefore direct value. We don't have the same outage windows. We're up all the time. We're meeting 3 nines availability, and this is something the business doesn't expect and is a great addition to value for them. Part of what we're talking about here is that we're primarily operations. So we're not a developer developing something and then going, oh, and then we're going to do it in dev, and then we're going to go do it in system test and carry on, but being driven from the development process. We're coming at this from the other way. So we're already kind of in control of UAT and prod. And so what we said to teams was, you do what you want in your early environment, UAT and prod, we're going to automate. And this is what you have to do that. So once we did that, teams realized how beneficial it was. So even though the team itself wasn't a CI/CD or an agile team, they saw the benefits of automation, and we could give them a lot of the benefits of those concepts, like for free, because we've already done the automations in UAT and prod. So doing it in their earlier environments, pushing left from prod back, allowed us to really quickly and easily support the automation in their early environments. So all of a sudden we get this buy-in from these teams saying, we want it. So we're not telling them to do the earlier environments. They're like, hey, can we get this? Can you do us a favor? Can you do this? So that worked really well for us.